I hope you're all excited this morning, as I am, to continue our study. Small possibility we might be heading back to be with Dad after class, just a heads up, but truly privileged to be here and so thrilled to be studying this text with you all. I'm going to just read something very quickly. We are going to continue our study right where we left off in chapter 3 and verse 1. But here's this to set us up this morning. The hardest thing to learn in Ecclesiastes is to trust what the writer is telling us. When I am honest with my life, I have to admit I keep trying to find some worth in life under the sun. The world around you and me keeps saying to us, this will be the thing that will really give you life. Just try this and fulfillment will be yours to keep. Do we read Ecclesiastes and then say to ourselves, yes, I know what's being said must be true. I know I should find my fulfillment in setting things above, not on this earth. I know that, but I just keep thinking I'm going to miss out on something if I forsake the pleasures of this world. I thought that really summed up very well the challenge when studying Ecclesiastes, and sometimes our takeaway feeling that we're unable to understand it fully. But that's something that I've grown tremendously in, and I hope we can all grow in this class. The more we can let ourselves lean into trusting what the author, what the preacher says, the far better off we'll see, and the better we'll be able to undergo trials and difficulty and losses in this life. Perfect timing, we're in chapter 3. And our text that we got right to last class was in the first verses 1 through 15. Just a reminder, we're in this section where the preacher has taken a break from the heavy, difficult message of all the vanity that takes place in life. And he introduced some of the most encouraging words at the end of chapter 2, that there's nothing better, that we're able to live life under the sun, not finding fulfillment in ourselves, but only through God, with a higher purpose and a higher value in mind. And that is what is very difficult to trust, because then we are going to change our outlook on this life and not seek to find profit under the sun, which is very difficult because we all have done this. We all have tried this. So now we come to chapter 3 and looking at these first 8 verses now. Can you tell me, percentage-wise, based on this text, how much of our lives should we expect, or maybe that we might call would be happy times? For those of you mathematicians, percentage-wise, what do you see in this text?
Looks like a good 50-50.
Yes, 50% of the time. That's quite shocking, isn't it? That's not the message that we're often given. That's not what we often believe. It's most of the time, right? And then, there's just a few difficult times. Let me back up, because this is where we left off last time. How is this text typically used? Or maybe if you'd be willing to share, what have you typically done with it or applied it to? Yes.
I think it's typically to validate certain types of behavior, one side of the aisle or the other. I don't know, like war, it says war and peace.
Yeah, there's a time, yeah.
Or killing and kill and heal, the wilderness, I mean, I think
don't see Ryan Giesing, but he had mentioned to me after class last time he had often heard this read at funerals. Well, here we are gathered together for someone who has died, and we're going to read this text that says that there's a time to die. And I think I've heard that myself as well. The only interesting issue with that is this isn't written to those who are dead. It's written to the living. How is this supposed to impact the living? Were you going to say something, Mark?
What was your question? Was how percentage-wise, how much time would we be happy, how much time would we be sad?
Yes, and of course, we're not trying to make some hard, fast rule, but just looking at what's revealed.
Yeah, and I think the answer was 50%. But I want to challenge that. I think there's 28 things on here, and being happy is only one of them, so that's 3.5% of your time. So in light of that, we can't expect to be happy 50% of the time in our life. There's going to be a lot of other things that we're going to be in our life, and part of it is happiness. But it's, I'm not trying to complicate it, but there's so many things that we need to do, and happiness isn't 50% of everything we're going to do in our life.
Yes, and don't have time to dig further into the idea of happiness, but just the word itself, it's completely reliant on the situation. And that's why it just totally comes and goes. If our fulfillment is in happiness, we're just constantly getting plowed over because it's just we're getting high and then we're low and then we're high and then we're low. Which is another outlook on this text is this is just the ups and downs of life. Really quickly, I did see a hand. Another mistake that we can make is the world's message to us is different than this. These seasons of life, the world's message is to maybe sweep under the rug the 50% of bad times, grief, mourning, loss. We don't like to talk about that. Society's message to us today, we've mentioned this before, live, love, and laugh. Or, good and gather. Peace, love, coffee. Right? We focus on the good seasons. Be the change you want to see. Oh, that sounds really good. But that's not what the text is saying. We don't have control over these ups and downs. Or, I don't know how new this is, but it seems kind of like a newer movement. And I'm not going to say that I have any problem whatsoever, but instead of a funeral, we're going to have a celebration of life. And again, don't have the slightest problem with that whatsoever. But we need to be so careful. Are we deceiving ourselves? Because there is grief, there is sadness, there is mourning, there is futility. And we're just doing a great disservice to ourselves by trying to hide that. You see how society doesn't want to admit, and just mankind in general, their life is completely out of our control, and these seasons, especially if you have not an eternity in your mindset, are just going to roll you under. Did I see a hand? Yes.
I was going to say, when you see all these different life events, it reminds me of how fluid life is. And it's like you said, there's ups and downs. And, this is almost like you compare it to like an ocean coming in. And if you're not grounded strongly in the Lord, you're either going to drown in the waves and get swept under, or, hopefully if you are grounded in the Lord, that's what's going to allow you to rise above the wave, to not drown in all of this. Because none of this is going to change. It's going to be ups and downs, like you've mentioned several times. And most of it, if not all of it, is out of our control. And so all the more reason it just points to we've got to be grounded in the Lord and not in all these life events and looking for these to fulfill us.
And as a matter of fact, if you even look at the layout, it's very beautiful poetically. the good times and then the bad times. It's good, bad, and then flips, bad, good, flips, good, bad, flip. We just can't even control it. We can't figure out when is it going to happen, what is it going to be. You know, it's like each year comes around, oh, it's going to be completely different this year. And then saying, well, all things are to be done at their proper time. Well, the problem with that is some of these seasons are bad and or sinful, which is going to lead us right into verses 9 through 15. And here's the part that really blows your mind. 9 through 15. Okay, I missed an important step. A few key takeaways from 1 through 8. Sorry, I need to touch on these. So here is what's important for us. Instead of living like everyone else does, trying to avoid life's ups and downs, we should be living in reality. We are along for the ride here, and one of the most comforting thoughts there has ever been is that God is in control. As we're going to see here in the next few verses, He's able to make beautiful what is evil. And if you were here 2 weeks ago for the Amazing Brothers lessons on suffering, we saw that. God, Joseph at the end of his life was finally able to see after all the years, yeah, you guys, you did mean this for evil, what you did to me, but God made it beautiful. And that is something we can never forget because only God is able to do that. Yes, Nick?
I just think verses 1 through 8 can be really, really comforting too. Because like you said, it shouldn't be used to justify some of the seasons in this. But if you're like in a time of war, it can feel like this is going to last forever. This is going to be the thing that ends all things. But God says it's just a time, it's just a season. It's going to pass and there's going to be peace. Or if you're in a period of mourning and it feels like this is never going to end, the grief is all consuming. God says this is a season, this is the time, and it's going to pass. And so when I read through this, I see a very hopeful message as well to be like, everything's in its proper place. If you're in one of these seasons, know that ultimately it is only for a season.
Outstanding point. This should be a very comforting text, and the whole message of Ecclesiastes. Consider how encouraging this would be for the nation of Israel during the time of their exile and captivity. How in the world would God turn things around from such a failed people? What a sad story all of the Old Testament is, from Genesis to Esther, of their failure over and over again. But God is able to bring hope from the ashes. And He says things like, my servant in whom I delight will come, in Isaiah 42 and verse 1. You are my servant Israel, in whom I will display my glory, Isaiah 49 verse 3. If He can do those things for Israel, we can only just imagine what He can do with our lives. Yes?
At the end of verses 1 through 8 also, those things are entirely different for each individual. I mean, it's the only thing certain in any of those is death. And that's what we need to end up being prepared for, regardless of how our life plays out.
Very good. And it's just again to re-emphasize how important it is that we accept it's not in our control and we stop trying to manipulate life. The danger of denial, which is going to set us up for a full-blown midlife crisis. And despite all the jokes about that, that is not a good thing. Or a thrisis. Saw that one. A crisis in your 30s. Or whatever it is when you have it in your 20s. This is why this rate of suicide just continues to climb and climb and climb. We think that we're going to manipulate and control these events, and we're not able to find profit and fulfillment under the sun. So it's such a danger. We are susceptible for this just as much as anyone else. So moving on, verse 9, what does the worker gain for his struggles? I just touched on this. Don't separate this from the verses prior to it. The idea here is, what does man gain from trying to manipulate the seasons of life to fit what he wants? He can't gain it. In verse 10, he says, I have seen this task God has given people to be occupied with, which again we saw in chapter 1, trying to see all that's done under the sun. But it doesn't have to be like that. We don't have to go on this search. We don't have to try to manipulate and control our lives. We can accept and trust that God is in control. As Nick mentioned, he is able to take a terrible season and somehow bring good from it. And that's just the most comforting thought there is. And, hey, if it's good, don't sit back like we typically do and say, it's going to be this way forever. This is just going to continue. No, there's going to be difficult seasons. If it's difficult, hey, don't give up. It's not going to be like this forever. Does it keep you guessing? Absolutely. And that's really difficult. And that brings us to verse 11. He's put eternity in man's hearts. Kind of can go all over a little bit with this verse, but the best way that I'm able to understand the idea is we wonder about tomorrow. What's different from people versus animals is we wonder about tomorrow. You know, animals don't get depressed. People do. And then also we wonder about the past, eternity. But we're unable to see it all. By the way, why do you think God has put eternity in man's hearts and not in animals? I saw a couple hands. Yes. Yes, sir.
Well, personally, I think it has something to do with us being created in the image of God. There is something about, you've already said, there's something about men that's different than the animals. And I think I would go back to Genesis. We are created in the image of God. And in that respect, God has created an eternal being. And this is one of those things that, it's hard for me to think about how I would prove this scripturally, but anecdotally, I look around and I see it everywhere. I see men striving for that which they cannot attain, or I see men striving to understand their place in the universe without seeking the very book that explains their place in the universe. So anyway, I think that we're created in God's image in that respect. God has put eternity in our hearts.
Very good. That was my own question, by the way. I was just curious. Not saying I have the answer, but I really thought that was very helpful. Yes.
You see that men have souls, and like my cat at home, Rosie, she doesn't have a soul. So like, if something happens, she's not gonna go to like cat heaven or anything. She doesn't. We are destined to either go to hell or we're destined to go to heaven if we live a good life and become Christians. And we have a soul inside of us, which is hard to understand, but we have a soul. And eternity, I mean, yeah, this life is fun, but it's also hard. But the you don't do what's right in, like, the devil's eyes.
Okay. Let's take a look, building on top of this, at verses 12. Does this phrase look familiar? We've already seen this once. He uses this phrase 3 times in this entire section, chapter 2, verse 24 to the end of chapter 3. There's nothing better, only this time, listen. This is because he words it differently. It's the gift of God. There's nothing better than to rejoice and enjoy your life under the sun. Stop trying to control the events. There's nothing better than to rejoice because God has given this. Now, if someone has given us a gift, they are the giver, we are the receiver. The receiver doesn't get to make the gift how they want it. We get to take what God gives us. This is therefore the only logical conclusion for us to be able to live through life's ups and downs is because we can rejoice in what God is doing. He's in control. He is running my life. I am not running my life, which is a very, very comforting thought. If you've lived long enough and ran your own life, you've wrecked it already. And so that's one of the most comforting thoughts in the world. And this idea that there is nothing better, eating, drinking, I thought a little bit more about this last week in a couple discussions with a few of you. Here's just an illustration, bear with me, to be able to understand this. Apart from God, we can't enjoy. Sometimes, if you're like me, I read that and I think, I think I can still enjoy. Take our little children, for example. I try to keep the front yard as nice as I can, but somehow Nick has found a spot to dig a hole and make a dirt mound. Or out here, they all run straight for the molehills because there's nothing like putting your hands in some soft dirt. But yet, we think we need to buy them toys. You see, this is exactly what we do with our own lives. God says, I've given you the best gift there is, eating and drinking. No, we go out and we say, we need to have X, Y, Z, or we need to be like this person, or we need to be like this. We mess it up. I mess it up. Don't ever underestimate that. And children are such a powerful example. They don't have any clue how much we spent to get them a toy, and yet they can have so much joy over dirt and sticks. God says, I made it this way. You can't change it. Don't think you're going to go out there and find it. So anyways, I don't know how helpful that was, but yes, sir.
One thing that I like that you did in my ESV, there's a heading between verses 8 and 9, but you said, don't make a gap, keep the thought going. And so verses 1 through 8, bad, good, bad, good, bad, good, bad, good. And then in verse 12, I've been reading this with the emphasis on, I know that there is nothing better. But what if you just follow the thought and put the emphasis later? I know there's nothing better for them than to rejoice and enjoy the good life. I wonder if that's how it flows. There's bad, there's good. There's bad, there's good. But what's the thing that we do? Enjoy the good.
Yes. And we try to make that our pursuit instead of rejoicing in this is all God's gift to us. I think you hit the nail on the head. That's especially what I did in chapter 2. I put the eating and drinking before the God. I can do this before with or without God, and I can't. It cannot happen. And I tell you, it's taken me years to be able to better understand that. So if you're sitting there thinking, I'm not really sure, that would make me feel a little bit better because I've been working on this for a long time. Was there another hand? Yes, sir.
So I think the pursuit of the eating and the drinking, that's kind of a thing that we as humans do, and we think we'll find joy in that. And we see right here where it is the gift of God to enjoy that. But at the end of verse 13, it's, I think the key of it is we're taking, by having the eating and the drinking, it's the reward of your toil by working. Because of your being hard at work and working in your toil, God's given you this gift of enjoying the eating and the drinking and the good things of life. Take that all the way back to Genesis 3 in the garden. Adam and Eve had everything that you could imagine. But Satan tempted Eve and said, but you don't have this one thing. And think of it as an easy pill, an easy button. If I do this one thing, I will have everything I need. And today, we do that too. We always want, you said the toy, or maybe that magic pill that makes us drop 50 pounds in 2 weeks, or we're always seeking the easy button. But I think the trick, what we fail to see, is God wants us to work. He wants us to work the toil, and by doing the toil, then we will have this gift of enjoying the gifts He's given us, the eating and the drinking and the living the good life.
Very good. I'm going to say one last thing. We're going to move on from this. It's the same as what you're saying. There is, I believe, a great nuance to this. Getting the order out of order is what throws it all off. Everything that you're saying is what he's saying, but my understanding, we make it about the toil. We make it about the eating and drinking. That's what we end up doing. And the next thing you know, my career is my life. Or my pleasure, or my hobbies, or whatever God's given for me to enjoy, I'm seeking my fulfillment there. That's exactly the problem and that nuance there of getting that out of place instead of looking in light of eternity. And let's say we try the preacher's message here. Let's say we give it a chance and look at life under the sun and say, okay, there really is it's all vanity. Now I'm going to look at everything different because of that. And I'm going to be able to enjoy it because if it's a bowl of Cheerios versus, some smoked chicken, it's fine. It's a gift from God. Ridiculous example. But whatever it is, I'm able to be content now because I can enjoy the gift God has given me. So there's a nuance there. We can't miss it. It throws everything else off. Let's keep moving here to finish chapter 3. I love what he does here in verse 16, 17, and 18. He literally anticipates our next question. Well, if God's in control and he makes everything beautiful in its time, then what about injustice in the world? What about wickedness? All right. Looking at verse 18, what should be going through our minds when we see wrong in this world where there should be right? Verse 18. What do we need to have going through our minds? Yes, sir?
When there's wrong in this world, and I'm not going to mention everything, but when there's wrong in this world, like violence and stuff, it says, 1 Thessalonians 5, rejoice always, pray without ceasing, in everything give thanks. So it's like, I'm on this earth, when there's things that I don't like that's happening in this earth, I'm supposed to rejoice always, like, not every time, like, be happy, but rejoice, because I have God in my life, and pray for the bad people, pray for the good people, pray for the bad things to stop, pray for the good things to continue. But but I'm supposed to give thanks every single day of my life.
Okay? I'm looking for what he says, though, in verse 18. What should be going through our minds? When we see injustice, wickedness in the place of righteousness, what should be going through our minds? Yes, sir.
There's kind of almost these contrasting ideas. I don't know if you're alluding to 17, where it says God will judge the righteous and the wicked at the appointed time, basically, but then 18, that we're just being tested.
Thank you.
That's sort of, there's a lot of critiques that I
Is that consistent with God's character throughout Scripture? To test us throughout hardship,
to a degree,
injustice?
to test but not tempt, to train, but not set us up to fail.
Absolutely. I had to go back to Brent's lesson, going to the wilderness, when I came to this. Why did God lead Israel through the wilderness? To test, to see what was in their hearts, to humble them. Because anybody can say, this is who I am, when we're in a good season of life. We don't know who we are. And there are lessons that God cannot teach us until we go through these difficult times. Now, that is an incredibly comforting message, not a torturous. Yes, sir.
I feel as though the argument about justice and wickedness could fall under the same category that we saw in 1 through 8. These could be opposed things. We could have 30 of them instead of 28, because in all of these, we're looking at the negative part, and we're saying, when there's war, or when there's weeping, that is a time when God is not in control. Right? That would be almost a natural response. And the author is saying, no, in both of these situations, in war and in peace, in weeping and in joy, God is in charge. But then he takes this next section, in 16 through 17, to give, I think, a little bit more of an elaborate explanation that when we see wickedness, it doesn't mean that God is holding back justice or that he doesn't have the ability to bring about justice.
Excellent. And that was the second point that he makes, is there is a time when God's going to judge the wicked, which is the Psalm 73 picture. But God wants to test us, to bring us to the place that we need to be. Okay, so final text in chapter 3. Verse 18, I said to myself, this happens concerning people so God may test them. They may see for themselves that they are like animals. For the fate of people and the fate of animals is the same. As one dies, so dies the other. They all have the same breath. People have no advantage over animals, since everything is futile. All are going to the same place. All come from dust, and all return to dust. Who knows if the spirit of people rises upward and the spirit of animals goes downward to the earth? I have seen there is nothing better than for a person to enjoy his activities, because that is his reward. For who can enable him to see what will happen after he dies? Okay. Final text here. I want you to see this amazing picture that he gives. We are no better, even though we have eternity in our hearts and we wonder about tomorrow, which, if we're not careful, can cause us to worry and want to control the seasons of our lives. But he brings it full circle and says, we don't have any more power over this than animals. We are just like animals. We live and we breathe and we die. Which I thought is interesting. The evolutionists tell us we are animals, and they think we can control life's events. No, if we're animals, we definitely can't control. Neither can control life's events. And then, in verse 21, Who knows if the spirit of people rises upward and the spirit of the animal goes down to the earth? Now, most of the time I've read this and I thought, did he really just say that? He really doesn't actually know. And it's kind of something I laugh at a little bit, because really what I think he's saying is, who lives this way? Who lives with this kind of wisdom? Animals die, and that's it. People die, and their spirit goes upwards, but nobody lives that way. Who lives that way? So, excellent, rich wisdom. Is there any questions or comments on this before we move to chapter 4? Okay, chapter 4. So, we will look at this again. He's going to turn his search back to the vanity that is being done under the sun. And we're going to suggest that there's roughly 5 different scenes in chapter 4, but they're all going to be tied together. Verses 9 through 12 are going to be the key to everything in chapter 4. So let's begin with verses 1 through 3. I'm just going to go ahead and read this, and I want you to make whatever observations or questions or thoughts that you have. Again, I observed all the acts of oppression being done under the sun. Look at the tears of those who are oppressed. They have no one to comfort them. Power is with those who oppress them. They have no one to comfort them. So I admire the dead who have already died more than the living who are still alive. But better than either of them is the one who has not yet existed, who has not seen the evil activity that is done under the sun. So what do you think of when you see the person described here in verses 1 through 3? What's going on?
The oppressors are in control, there is no one to comfort the oppressed.
Yeah, we don't have to look too hard or think too hard. Basically, for the most part in world history, government typically oppressing those that are underneath of it. So you have those who have power and those who do not. They're under their control, and they are oppressing them. What else? Did anybody see anything else? Sometimes it's difficult to relate to this text because we don't live in a third world country under a dictatorship. But we need to be careful not to so easily dismiss his words here, because people can still be oppressed every day around us. You can think about people we know who have been stuck in a job, a dead-end place they can't afford to get their family away from, or they have an oppressive boss or someone in authority over them. And also sometimes the easy tendency is to read this and think, well, disaster is probably going to happen to the other guy and not me. But again, we wouldn't have to think very hard and long for people who are very close to us to see disaster does happen around us. So the words of Paul when he underwent his trial in Asia came to mind in 2 Corinthians 1, 8 through 7. He said, "We despaired of life so much that we felt we had received the sentence of death." And his next words are some of the most difficult for me to come to terms with. He says, Yeah, the reason that all this happened was so that we would not rely on ourselves, but rely on God. We'll pick up chapter 4 next week, Lord willing. Thank you so much for all of your excitement and participation.